You know, in the Old Testament, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were, they're called the patriarchs, or the fathers. They're the fathers of the children of Israel. And the children of Israel are the people of God. In the New Testament, repeatedly, Paul says that the church, the believers, are the real Israel. So we are the real people of God. Look around you. You are part of the real Israel. And as such, the experiences of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob should also become our experiences, so that we can, in experience and in actuality, be God's people today. So when we say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we're not saying that Abraham represents God the Father, and Isaac represents God the Son, and Jacob represents God the Spirit. Rather, Abraham represents the experience or the work of God the Father on his chosen ones. Isaac represents the experience or the work of God the Son, and Jacob represents the experience or the work of God the Spirit. And we'll see all of this in the coming weeks. But last week we had a really marvelous word on the experience of Abraham, his experiencing God the Father. And I don't have the time to repeat it, but I just encourage you to go to the YouTube page. I watched that video again, even though I was here last week. But you see Abraham experiencing God, knowing how to have faith in God, knowing how to live in fellowship with God, and ultimately God's goal that God would produce Christ within Abraham, or as a result of God's work. I don't have the time to explain it, I just encourage you to check out the video. This week, we come to a kind of a, peculiar title. How about we just read this title all together? Ready? A defeated righteous man. It really seems like an oxymoron or a paradox. How can somebody be righteous yet be defeated? But we need to come to this. This is an important part of the record in the book of Genesis. And this morning we're actually going to touch something that's not so positive, not so wonderful. It's actually a warning to us. But we don't skip it because all Scripture is the breath of God and all Scripture is profitable. All Scripture is instructive in righteousness. So we're not going to skip something just because it's a little touchy, but we want to open to the Lord and receive this word of warning. And, okay, some of you might be wondering what this is. You might have been staring at it, and I don't know if you think it's like housing prices in, starting the year 2008, or some kind of economic chart. Anybody have a guess what that is? It's related to the song we just sang. Okay, we'll come back to that. But, okay, so I'm going to kind of do a continuation of the map that we started last week, because we need to kind of trace, and I hope those of you on that side can see this, but as we consider the experience of Abraham, what we saw was something very marvelous. That initially he was in this place called Ur of the Chaldees, and God called him, and God continued to call Abraham, bit by bit. And Abraham kind of dragged his feet, but the more God appeared to him, the more God called him, the more Abraham was infused with faith. And he was able to respond and follow God. So Abraham started to travel to Haran, and then to Bethel, and eventually to Hebron. And this land right here is what the Bible calls Canaan, the good land. And we just sang, Lord, lift me up to higher ground. This land right here is higher in elevation. Now this here is the Mediterranean Sea. So going back to this chart, actually, this is what this chart is. This is the Mediterranean Sea, okay, right here. This is like another, I don't know, topographical map, is that what you call it? Something like that, right? This here is the land of Canaan. Okay, you see it kind of, this is why the song calls it a tableland. It's like higher elevation, which is symbolic of our experience of Christ, higher elevation. And you have, like cities, Jerusalem, and etc. Down here is what is called the Dead Sea, or the Salt Sea. And actually, it's lower than even sea level. or Mediterranean sea level. It's another 1,000 feet. So you see, this is higher ground. You follow the picture? Okay, so in Abraham's calling, he was actually coming here to this higher ground. So you see Mediterranean Sea, Canaan, and the Dead Sea corresponding to that, right? Okay, Abraham is being called upward. And we saw that and we enjoyed that. But there's kind of a parallel story and a parallel track. And this is regarding Abraham's nephew, who is Lot. And let's read 1 Corinthians 10:11 all together. Now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our admonition, unto whom the ends of the ages has come. And then let's read Genesis 13:10 through 12. Ready? Go.
And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the entire plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before Jehovah had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Like the garden of Jehovah, like the land of Egypt, as he goes to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself the entire plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and moved his tent as far as Sodom.
So I really hope you can see this picture, because this is very applicable to today. And even, I would say, if you're a college student on campus or in the dorms, this word is extremely applicable. And, right, you follow these verses. Abraham, when he traveled, Lot was traveling with him, right? And Abraham was coming here. Eventually, a controversy arose between Abraham and Lot. And we just read these verses. So Abraham and Lot, at this time, they were living right here together. Listen, you're Lot. You've been traveling with Abraham, who is called by God. God appeared to Abraham. God gave Abraham the promise and the blessing. Now, if you're Lot, wouldn't you want to stay with Abraham? In the entire earth, at that time, Abraham had God's calling and God's appearing. But as we read these verses, Lot was here, and what did it say? It says, he lifted up his eyes, and he saw the entire plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. It was like the garden of Jehovah, like the Garden of Eden. It was such an attractive land. So Lot, it says, so Lot chose for himself the entire plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. So this is truly an impressive picture. Lot basically was here with Abraham, and he separated himself, and he decided to go east toward the plains. And then it says, he dwelt in the cities, and he moved his tent down and down and down as far as Sodom. Do you see that? It's not just going down south, but look at the picture there on that side, right? It's elevation going down. So there are these two paths here. Abraham is being called upward, and Lot is initially with him. But then at some point, Lot decides to go on his own. And he looks out, and he says, wow, that land looks really good. And he separates himself from Abraham. And he starts a decline. He starts a descent. And inevitably, this descent brings him to a place called Sodom. And Sodom, with its neighboring city Gomorrah, have a particular characteristic in the Bible. And they represent a city of sin, a city of indulgence, a city of lust, and quite plainly, especially the most rampant characteristic was homosexuality.